Hello and welcome back to Games Week Berlin Pro Experience here from Berlin for another panel, and I'm joined by a co-host again. Welcome, Tim from Booster Spaces with me again.
Hey, Markus.
Hey, Tim. How was your Games Week Berlin so far?
Fun. Definitely fun. Stressful fun. So I think every event is kind of the same in ways of the personal energy you put into it, and also like the energy that then which tickles out here and there. So definitely need some sleep, but doing online events or virtual events is really a challenge. And the good thing about it is that there's so many people who are in countries or that wouldn't have come to Berlin probably because the way is just too long and maybe the flights are too expensive and whatever. But those people can just click in, and so that's pretty cool actually. So this is one of the great things I really like about this version of the Games Week Berlin, that you can reach out to people who wouldn't go to Berlin.
Cool. So Tim, you're joining us for a very, very interesting and special topic today. Can you tell us, what are we going to speak about now?
Oh yes, right now we're talking about something that Richard Bartle said. So Richard Bartle is one of the, I would say, godfathers of video game development, at least godfathers of the MMO. Probably without him, World of Warcraft wouldn't look like it looks like right now. Because he invented or co-invented the first MUD, the multi-user dungeon, back in the days. I think it was 1978.
What did he say?
He said that game developers are gods.
Which makes me a god. I like that.
Might make you a god, yes. So probably this is something, because this is a bold statement, I think, saying that. And so he, yesterday, speaking about highlights, personal highlights of the Games Week. Yesterday, he did the keynote and he elaborated on this. And we just thought, because, of course, I talked about this with him before, and I said, this is really something you should do a little bit more often at the Games Week, not only for people who have a ticket on Zoom, but also for somebody who is interested in video games and who's maybe also a video game designer and who likes to do this theoretical playing around a little bit with, I mean, this is like science meets theology. You know.
So, but the good thing is we're not only going to talk about him, but we're going to talk with him and with two other very amazing guests today. Welcome. We have them here. We have Richard Bartle, Jesper Juul, and Sebastian Möring with us. Hello. Can you hear us?
Yes.
It's good to have you with us. I would like to start with a quick introduction round. Can please everybody of you make a short introduction of himself? Richard, would you like to start?
Yes, okay. So I'm Richard Bartle, as you've just heard. Mainly known for not having died yet. I'm a long-standing, I've been in the computer games industry since before there was a computer games industry. Made millions and millions and millions of dollars, but not for me, for other people. The things I'm best known for are the player types model, which I published in about 25 years ago, and it's still taught, so must be something right. And co-inventing MUD, which nobody's heard of anymore unless they're in their 60s, which is the text-based precursor to today's massively multiplayer online role-playing games. I'm currently Professor of Game Design at the University of Essex and guest professor at the University of Uppsala, their Gotland campus. And that's pretty well me.
Okay, next one, Jesper.
Hi, I'm Jesper Juul. I'm a video game researcher. Places in the world at ITU and at MIT and NYU, and now I'm at the Royal Academy in Copenhagen. And so my interest is in ways in kind of how video games are meaningful. And so I wrote both about kind of rules in games and about kind of being a sore loser or the importance of failing in video games. And my most recent book is about indie games and the history of the idea of making independent games in the first place. It's called Handmade Pixels.
Let me just say I really like the background, Jesper.
It was sent to me.
Okay, and we have one more guest, Sebastian.
That's really great. I'm happy that you can actually hear me now, so I'm not even going for background. I'm Sebastian Möring. I'm an assistant professor in media studies at the European Media Studies program at the University of Potsdam and University of Applied Sciences Potsdam, where I'm basically doing game studies. And since Jesper just mentioned it, I guess I'm studying something very similar, like the way how games can be meaningful. I did a PhD on metaphor in computer games, meaning how games can mean metaphorically or how they don't do this. And this is a great pleasure actually to be on this panel, because the first time I saw Richard and Jesper was in 2008 when we had the Philosophy of Computer Games conference in Potsdam, and I was still a master student organizing the conference, and now I'm here speaking with you. That's quite amazing.
Okay, cool.
Well, I'm glad somebody's advanced since then.
Right.
Maybe we should start with your statement, Richard, because when you say game developers are gods, what do you mean? Is this a metaphor? Can you explain a little bit?
Oh, no, it's not a metaphor. What is a god? Well, a god is someone who has the control of the physics of a reality, so they can change how a reality works. When I say that we're gods, I don't mean we're gods of the reality we're living in, reality. I mean that we're gods of realities that we create. And the realities we create are computer games. Some of them aren't very sophisticated realities, and some of them are very sophisticated realities. The ones I'm particularly interested in, because of my background, obviously, is the massively multiplayer online role-playing games. I just call them MMOs, or virtual worlds. But the principle's the same. Essentially, you create a reality, you control the physics of that reality, you can make that change however you want, you can make that be whatever it is, and because of that, that makes you the god of that reality, not of the reality we're living in. I really want to stress that in case that anybody catches this and thinks, there's a man we need to kill. No. This is only the realities we create. Now, some people might still want to kill you because, as the oh, my picture's frozen. Whoa! As the title of this suggests, there's this well, that's blasphemy, creation of things. Well, we can come to that later, but I don't believe it is. So that's my standpoint. So the reason that I say we're gods is because we are gods. That doesn't mean that people should treat us with some kind of amazing respect that we get from everywhere. You know, like you would give another god, like, I don't know, if Zeus showed up, you might be a bit more respectful. But it does mean that we have the kind of responsibilities that a god of a reality would have. And that's what I was getting at in my talk yesterday.
Yes, but what's your take on that? Are game developers gods, and what is the responsibility of a game designer?
The responsibility.
Well, maybe.
Sorry, I missed the beginning there, so I didn't know who I was talking to.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes,
go ahead.
No, certainly you can see that has been kind of pointed out many times. Sort of game creating worlds or creating kind of games is a kind of sub-creation, right? You're making a world within this world, and with that comes a kind of certain kind of responsibility. And I think the one thing that you notice both for game design and I think for a lot of people in the world is that gods are both kind of popular and kind of unpopular. So especially if you're a game designer, there's a lot of complaining about you not being being the kind of right kind of God. So certainly the subjects of whatever world you create tend to be kind of very unhappy or very frustrated with you. And I think it's kind of interesting that there is a theological argument in Christianity saying that, in a way, say if you make a game and the players complain about the rules or the rules being unclear, that actually has a theological parallel, right? So there's an argument in Christianity saying that, in a way, it's on purpose that the rules are unclear, right? Because if it was just completely clear how you would be rewarded by God, then you would in fact be a kind of slave. That the whole point of kind of that this is the argument that Christianity, in a way, that the rules kind of have to be somewhat unclear, because otherwise everybody would be slaves, right? So you have to have this kind of unclearness in order to kind of give free will or give a space for actual human beings. And I think perhaps you can see some kind of parallel in game design too, right? That even though players may sometimes complain about kind of ambiguity and rules not being kind of completely perfect, we actually kind of want that kind of space as players to kind of figure out things for ourselves and to decide for ourselves what it is we want to do.
Sebastian, you're a media theorist. From your point of view, what would you say? I'm a game designer, I'm a game developer, but I'm also a writer. And Richard Bartle says game developers are gods. Is that any different to other media? What about novelists or writers for TV or movies? Am I more of a god as a game developer than in other creators of other medias?
Yeah, that is a very good question. I'm not sure if God is the right metaphor, because I can also think of game developers as being like some kind of magicians who are probably also overwhelmed by their own creation to some extent, and that puts a bit in question if they are really godlike. But apparently there's a difference towards other media, like, as you say, literature, for instance, where you have usually like you can have a narrator figure that is basically telling a story and therefore absolutely responsible for what you can possibly hear about that event, whatever happened anywhere, and it's up to you if you trust that person or not. In the case of game design, obviously, it is not only the game designer who's like responsible for whatever is being told in that world, but also however that world is functioning. Like as Richard says, you call it the physics, but in games you could also call it the mechanics or something like that. As such, you are to a good extent responsible for what gamers can do in a game. But I'm not sure if there's if it's in kind of almightiness or something that is attributed to godlike entities.
Well, let me propose this then. So you develop a massively multiplayer game, and your non-player characters, you give them artificial intelligence. So we give them artificial intelligence such that they are as smart as we are. Now, we can't do that today, but do you want 50 years, 500 years, 500,000 years? We've got as many years as you want. And at some point, we will have a virtual world with non-player characters who are as clever as us or cleverer. Now, are we gods? What do you think?
Well, I'm not sure if a goddess is or if a deity is defined by the ability to give cleverness to people, because cleverness itself is a question of who or what is not clever. But you definitely, I mean, maybe it's the other way around. I'm coming up with that quite early, but maybe the idea of that we have of gods is maybe gods are actually designers. And this is the way how you are, how it's possible to make that argument that you're making, that they are creators and designers are creators. And that's maybe the way how you can say they are gods to some extent, right? Because you obviously have the authority over that world. And even if you have enough authority to add artificial intelligence and add artificially intelligent entities, then you are definitely a very strong creator. That's probably true.
Well, then why wouldn't in that case, you're skirting around the issue of how any creator of the reality we live in would be a god or not. There doesn't have to be a creator of the reality we live in, but if there is, whatever that person is with regards to us is how we are with regards to those non-player characters. So the way we treat our non-player characters, we can then say, well, that's how we're being treated from above, or that's how different from how we're being treated from above. But either way, that relationship is the same relationship.
Richard, I'd like to know, if we're talking about non-player characters with certain attributes that might come in a certain amount of time, like you said, like that they're gonna be smart. Is it about like smartness, or is it about self-awareness? So what makes them valuable in the moment to maybe treat them like we would treat human beings, that then would make this process of creation something like a genesis? Is it like smartness, or is it really that they are self-aware of being alive?
Well, that depends on your own ethical stance. I mean, you could say these are just bits in a database, and they're giving the impression of being clever. They're giving the impression of having loving relationships and being suffering and all the other things, all the other qualities we have, but they're not really. And we can switch them all off and condemn 10 billion of them to death, but it doesn't matter because they're just bits in a database. Now, you could take that point of view. However, that would mean that the person who created our reality, or people, or if it was created, could take the same attitude and say, well, you guys, you're just bits in my database. There's nothing special about you. I just made you. I know how you work. I can switch you off and I've no need to worry. Now, if you want to treat somebody as a morally considerable being, so somebody to whom your morals apply, if you create a virtual world with the intention of putting into that world something which has, which you want to treat as a human or as a morally considerable being, then you have to treat them like that. So if I create a virtual world and into that world I put things which I want to be autonomous, free-willed entities, I have to treat them as if they are autonomous, free-willed entities. So
Jesper, I have a question.
In that sense, there's yeah, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but Jesper, what do you say? I'm a game designer and I write characters, and I do that. Next week, I sit down on my desk and write a character, and we're talking about artificial intelligence, and we're talking about things that are to come. But what is my responsibility when I sit down and write for our game that will come out in 2 years or so with nowadays technology? Do I have a special responsibility?
But it's a good question, right? So I mean, philosophically, there's always this argument between kind of consequentialist ethics. So like, what's the consequence of writing, say, an immoral character versus like the virtue of it, right? So I think we're always kind of uncertain about that, right? So I think perhaps on the surface of it, we feel that if you were to write a kind of deeply kind of immoral character for the first place, or an NPC whose AI you're coding, an NPC that does deeply immoral acts, is it then okay just because no actual humans are harmed? Or is there also kind of a larger issue in that you brought something bad into the world, even if it's just kind of symbolic, right? And then you can say, well, once you've created it, would it then, as Richard is talking about, would it then be okay to kind of kill it off if it's a bad NPC? And I think perhaps the difficulty here is that I think because we're so used to thinking of what we're doing as technology, so then we often thinking about it like, as Richard is talking about, like if we only had a slightly stronger computer, then eventually we'd get like a sentient AI or a sapient AI who could actually be as smart as us. But I also think perhaps realistically what we're doing is also kind of art, right? So that an NPC is not just an NPC that would become better if it had a better AI. An NPC is also like an interpretation of the world, right? So you're also deliberately cutting off stuff from the world. So you may be making an NPC or writing a character that never goes hungry, for example. It's not part of that character. And that's kind of the point of art, is also to kind of simplify things. And so I think also that's the way you could say that if you want to make things that are perceived as meaningful, it's also just a way of thinking about what you're doing, is that you're deliberately like removing stuff from the regular world and then like emphasizing some other stuff when you're kind of writing a character, and then to think about, well, what do you want that character kind of to be? And then perhaps as a personal kind of question to you is just like, how are you thinking about it? Are you thinking about it in a way where what matters is really that the character can do whatever because no actual humans are harmed? Or are you thinking about it in a way where you want to bring good into the world, for example? So you only want to create kind of beautiful or positive characters. And that's like a really hard, I think, to me, that's always a kind of really hard question you have to ask yourself when you're making art, such as kind of characters in video games.
So, like saying that the responsibility right now for video game designers or any kind of artists is to that they are responsible for their creation and how the creation is going to be perceived by the world. And if they're going to do something that affects people positive, then that this is good, and then they do something good with their creation. And the other way around, do they something bad when they, I don't know, like develop a horror game or develop something that is extremely violent or maybe extremely like about sexual abuse and about maybe what about porn? Is that something? Is that in this way a creation that is bad?
So I think these are somewhat open questions, I think, which are kind of run across all kinds of art, right? Like no matter if you're doing kind of painting or kind of literature, right? So I should perhaps ask you to just to, in a way, say the answer to that is also perhaps just something that it's something you have to think about when you're making it. Like what is the value that you are assigning to it personally? What's the value that you want others to assign to the thing that you're making? So I think it's hard to come up with this kind of perfect logical answer to it. But just saying that in a way, it's perhaps also up to you as a developer to define what responsibility you have and how you want your stuff to be perceived, right? And look at how people are kind of perceiving it and reacting to it. So you say that, I'm just saying that it's not just a logical thing, it's also a kind of social, cultural question and a personal question for you, right?
Speaking about responsibility in game design, Sebastian, yesterday here we talked in another panel about The Walking Dead. In the first episode of The Walking Dead, you get to decide if you rescue a boy or a girl, and the other one has to die. So that's decision making, this is branching narrative, and this is a decision of the writer to have that in the game. But the ethical question behind this is maybe not even how should the player behave, but should that even be in the game? Or do we have the responsibility as game designers and as creator of worlds and as gods, I don't know, to not even implement something like this because it's unethical and we bring players into certain situations that do we have the rights to bring another person in such a situation in digital media? What do you say to this?
Oh, that's a very good question, a very tricky question. First of all, I would say it is okay to do so, given that you might want to express something specific with your creation, right? Maybe you're a game designer and you specifically want to be working about ethical problems. And I guess that's also what's the essence of games like The Walking Dead, for instance. You're constantly brought into these questions: should I save this one person or the other? And you figure out, at least in that example, you figure out you can only take a decision, but either way, it can feel right or wrong for yourself. And if that is your goal as a game designer, then it's obviously okay to do that. But then on the other hand, I think there's probably also limits to which extent you can show such ethical dilemmas, right? When other questions are coming in, for instance, if you are, I don't know, we have these questions with regard to games which portray fascism or the Nazi times in computer games in Germany, for instance. Can you show it? To which extent can you show it? And it's obviously a question of what you as a designer think you can do, but you will always also have to face what sort of a certain public will say about your game as well. So if you choose to portray specific things and then your audience says like, no, this is way too rough, or this is challenging me way too much, you would somehow have to deal with that as well, right? So it is sort of a it's up to you probably, and also up to how you define yourself towards your audience, what you can possibly show and what not, I would say as well. I guess that's another point that comes in there, and it's probably even way more complex than what I just said.
Richard, what do you say? I mean, you as I understood, you are thinking things further and how they will develop to. Is it really up to me, or if we think this to the end, do I have a certain responsibility to not implement content like this, or what will become of this if we keep writing scenes like these?
Well, it's the same for every medium. We all have, if you're writing a novel, if you're producing a play, even if you're doing ballet or sculpture, there's what you're saying through your work to the audience may not be palatable. Now, Sebastian was saying, if that's the whole point, if what you're trying to say involves that, then I think you have every right to do it. If you're doing it as some kind of gimmick, or you're doing it, you're trying to cover yourself behind some, it's just art, a frame to keep you away from punishments you would normally get, then yes. So a character in a book might say something incredibly racist, and you might think, well, that's a bad character. But the moment you start thinking this is a bad book, that's when it suddenly starts to be different. Now, what I was saying, the whole reason I was talking about developers, particularly designers, as being gods of virtual worlds, is because they have this power, but they're reluctant to use it. They have the power to make the world anything they want to be, but they tend not to. They tend to hold back. They seem to regard themselves as engineers. Now, as Jesper was saying, game design is an art, and as an artist, you have the right is to yourself to express. You need to express through your art. We're game designers, and we express ourselves through game design because that's our medium. It's through the processes of gameplay. That's where we carry the artistic message we want to send to our players. But too few game designers look on it like that. From their perspective, they're not so much game designers as designers of games.
Yeah. So they're
just people. Yeah.
So you say that if you're designing, for example, a virtual world, then you, in the best case, should be responsible for designing it so that it is in some way meaningful, that it's not only shallow, same business as usual, hero is going to save the world and that's it, but something that gives a little bit more, gives a little impulse to the world?
You should know what you're trying to say through the virtual world design. What is this virtual world about? What is the core of the message that I'm trying to give to my players? This is a game about freedom. This is a game about building bridges. This is a game about oppression. This is a game about love. This is a game about how bad war is. Whatever it is that you're trying to say, and you implement that through the game. And that artistic spine is what holds the game design together. If you start thinking, well, we've got to have something for achievers, so we'll put this stuff here, and something for explorers, and we'll put something in for them, and you partition people all off, player types wise, then yes, you get a functional game, but the point is that your message is going to everybody, and it has to be the same message. And if you put people in little silos and create different gameplay and different things to do for everybody, then your message has fallen apart. Your game is saying nothing. It's just a bunch of mini games sewed together. Now, if you accept that you're a god, that means you're accepting that you can do what you want to that game. Therefore, you should do what you want to that game, because you can't. Once you realize you are a god of the game world, that means you can't not be. You can't say, oh, I'm just doing what I'm told. I'm just obeying instructions from the manager or the producer or whoever, because you're not. You're choosing not to do it. You're choosing to hold back. Yeah.
Can it be, but isn't it like that? Video games is a business, and everybody who is going to develop something is a god for hire.
Yes, but they are a god for hire, but they're still gods. They still have that responsibility. Once the constraints of the business and the budget and other resources are all delivered, they still have to make decisions, and the decisions that they make are not the decisions anybody else would make. They're just the decisions they make, because they're the ones making it. And if they're holding back and thinking, well, I need to check these check boxes and so on, yeah, okay, they're designers of games, they're engineers. But game designers aren't engineers. Game designers are artists, and we don't get as good games from engineers as we get from artists. Okay, so they don't crash, they work quite well together, but they don't say anything. And the players are playing the game not for the basic mechanics, because mechanics are to a penny. You can get them from any game. What they're saying, what they're playing, is for how they're put together.
Jesper,
how the characters
you
create are different. Sorry.
I don't want to interrupt you. Jesper is trying to raise his hand, and
I didn't. Sorry, I didn't see your fingers.
Yeah, this is also a response to kind of Richard. So I think we all agree on the kind of. So I should say I've also worked as a programmer, so I love programming and I like programmers, right? But this thing about kind of game design being art rather than engineering in a sense, I think it also ties a bit to the kind of hypothetical that Richard was talking about, like saying in the future we have these perfect AI NPCs that are sentient and sapient and so on. And to me, I think perhaps it's actually much simpler than that. I think the whole kind of setup of Richard's thought experiment doesn't need kind of future AI. I think it would be enough to have, if you create like a very small kind of simple creature that is kind of really cute and has some way of expressing its desire to kind of continue to live forever and for you not to shut it down. It would be really, really simple to do, right? But I think that would actually feel equally powerful to the kind of future AI, right? So I think it's actually a lot of those thought experiments that Richard is talking about, you could actually do right now. And I think in some ways it's more about your kind of immediate personal reaction to something that kind of feels like it has kind of emotions and it has some kind of instinct for kind of self-preservation, and the knowledge that if you shut down the game or even if you close the browser, that creature will perish forever. So I think you could create like really, really strong emotions for that, like right now. But I think for some reason people have shied away from it. I think but that's perhaps talks to the kind of importance of Richard's point, right? That in a way we don't want to have this feeling of being gods, right? So we skirt around it and do games about stacking boxes instead.
Sebastian, do you agree?
Yeah, Yeah, roughly, I do agree. I do have an additional question, but first question is if what the example that Jesper just brought up, is that like a Tamagotchi 2.0 or something like that, which could be something like that, right? But I'm wondering, I liked what I like about Richard's point is that you're going for responsibility, and you're saying that you do have a responsibility on the one hand for the artwork of whatever you're creating, and then maybe also some kind of ethical responsibility of whatever comes out of it. But what I'm wondering about, and especially in the case of MMOs, for instance, they tend to become so complex, and I'm wondering, is there a limit to this kind of responsibility? So is there a limit when things become so complex and so complicated that it is actually not really possible for you to take responsibility for it anymore, which would be the case in the case of sapient AIs, right? Because then they start doing their own thing. And is that would that in turn then also have to be actually the limit for what you as a game designer could do, because you can't take responsibility for these things anymore? Would that be something that shows kind of a limit of this thought, or does it not?
From my perspective, that isn't so much the limit as the point. That's where you want to go. Once you've created a world which a reality which is self-sustaining and has people in it and they behave, then either you're satisfied with it or you're not. If you're not satisfied, then you will use your godly powers to make adjustments to it. You may find that they don't have morals and decide to go and give them some. There's many things you can do, but that's kind of the end goal. And of course, once you've got, you're not responsible for what the creatures the intelligent creatures you create do, but you are responsible for creating them. So it's a bit like if somebody's drunk, they can't be responsible for their actions, but they can be responsible for having got drunk in the first place. So if somebody's driving a car and they crash and, I was drunk, I didn't even know where I was, I've just woken up and well, yeah, okay, you weren't responsible, but you still are responsible because you created them. So I, as a god of my creation, whether it's a simple Tamagotchi that people are projecting emotions onto or personality onto, or whether it's something that could sit there and argue with you, please do not switch this world off because you're going to kill us all. Whether it's somewhere in between there or not, what you're doing when you're creating them is your responsibility. You're putting the boundaries around where they are, you're operating within it, and then you're letting them loose. Now, it's possible that that all works out well, but there are other things that you have to come into. I mean, are you going to introduce suffering to them? Are you going to make them suffer? Because we suffer, and if you want the world to be realistic, you'd make them suffer, but that's kind of cruel. But then if you don't make them suffer, how are they going to enjoy not suffering? Everything's going to be the same. So there's all sorts of arguments you have to make, but ultimately you're responsible for what you create, but not for what you create does, except that because you created them, you are, in a sense, responsible for what they do. Now,
Jesper.
Sorry.
Jesper, you wanted to say something?
No, but I thought it's it's an interesting kind of point. You could say like you're responsible for the kind of first order, but not the second order consequence of your creation or something like that, right? Because especially I think in indie games, there's been a lot of push for thinking kind of more about the kind of cultural value of the kind of things that you're creating. And I think also we see it a lot with all of the discussions about algorithms these days, right? That you might say, well, Twitter just makes an algorithm or Google just makes an algorithm, right? But then I think we become much more accustomed to thinking about, well, what kind of content does Twitter actually promote, or does Facebook is Facebook more likely to promote kind of crazy conspiracy theories about Corona than the kind of real deal, right? And so I think I think also we see a kind of shift in the kind of a cultural moment where we started thinking much more about these kind of second order consequences. And so I think perhaps today it's becoming harder in a way to do that, a bit what you argued right now, Richard, right? That saying that whatever the NPCs then do is not, or the players then do is not directly your responsibility. I think a lot of people now would say that it is, right? That you set up a system that creates kind of toxic behavior or promotes certain kinds of content and so on, and that you have responsibility all the way down in a sense. And of course, that's a lot of responsibility, right? But it seems that there's a lot of movement in that way in the discussions we're having.
When we talk about,
Well, that would mean.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Richard. When we talk about the future AI and modern technology and how games are developed nowadays, we also have to talk about procedural generation, I think. And like Jesper said, what do the players do with your creation? And am I still, as a game developer, responsible for what is happening in the narrative if I just provide a system that generates a procedural world and the story itself is mainly told by the players themselves, maybe in sandbox games like Minecraft or others?
Curious Expedition 2.
Curious Expedition 2. Who has the responsibility? Is it really the game designer or is the player the god? Richard.
Who are you asking? Me?
I'm asking you.
Well, that's like saying, is Microsoft the god because they create the word processor that you write your hate speech in?
They created the word.
Yeah. If you create the world and then the players go into the world and trash it full of things that they shouldn't, well, those are the players. The worst that you can be said to have done is to have let them in to the world. You could that could be the whole point of the game. If you were creating a game to teach people about how bad it was to live in a Soviet gulag in the 1970s, you probably would want every player to have a very miserable time of things. But that would be because that was part of your artistic statement. As for the responsibility of the designer, well, they've got responsibility to the players if they've made the players, if they've told the players the game is going to be of this particular nature and the game isn't. So if I say this game is going to be about knitting, then it better be about knitting and not stabbing people to death with knitting needles. But once you've given players the boundaries, and those boundaries will be ethical boundaries as well as genre boundaries, and age boundaries and other boundaries. Once you've set the boundaries, then within there, the players, what they expect is whatever you give them. Whatever you give them comes out of you, the designer. So what the players expect is for you as the designer to design, to give them part of you. That's the implications of being a god on the players, in that you've made them a promise, and the game they're playing is only how it is because of you. So you have to put yourself into that game for them. The game has to be the facet of yourself that you are projecting for them to see, and that's kind of what I was trying to get at yesterday. Well, not kind of, it was what I was trying to get at yesterday. I'm just not explaining it very well.
I really want to talk about the players a little bit, because what we talk about is the responsibility of developers. And if they create worlds that are so lifelike that everything you do as a developer has really a meaning, and what about the players then? If they then visit these worlds, like Westworld, for example, the TV show, where you then have to decide whether you want to treat AI and maybe like non-playable characters shitty or not. If you then go rampage in one of those worlds and kill those beings, creatures, whatever, are those who criticized, for example, first-person shooters, aren't they right in the long run? Well, who say, okay, I'm killing. There's no difference between killing a pixel and killing a real human being.
Who are you asking?
All of you. I don't. Maybe Sebastian.
I was saying, go ahead, everybody. But okay, let me think about it. Is there a difference? I think yes. There's a huge there's quite a difference because the game or the NPCs in some games are rather like flat, so they are not very deeply characterized, and they do very simple things, and they are very repetitive structures in whatever they do. So it appears easily to people that they are like objects rather than living beings, right? So that was one of the arguments that the first-person shooter team was saying, like, why it's okay to play first-person shooters, because eventually you're just shooting objects which look like humans but aren't. But on the other hand, in Westworld, it obviously becomes way more complex, because Westworld happens to be playing exactly with that very question: to which extent can you treat an artificial entity which seems to resemble a human being like an object or not, right? And that is exactly the point what they're getting at. And obviously there's this I don't know, I guess the game designers among us know this concept probably really well, the Uncanny Valley, which sort of happens before something becomes or in the moment something becomes really close to a lifelike original or something, it turns out to be really uncanny. And I think this is something which is extremely uncanny about Westworld, is that it is exactly posing this question: are we still dealing with an object, or are we actually dealing with a human being, or with a being that should have the status of a human being? And I can't really decide on that question, but I can just say that this is a really interesting and important question that's being brought up in that case.
Okay, let's come to one final round for each of you, because we're slowly getting to an end, unfortunately. Richard, what do you say now? Should game developers see themselves as gods? Yes or no?
Yes. Of course they should. They are gods. And if they don't see themselves as gods, they're never going to be able to do the godlike things that they can do and should do in order to give us better games. While they think that they're not gods, while they think that they're magicians or architects, then no, we aren't going to get the games that we deserve. But once they realize they're gods, they'll realize they're artists, and they'll realize they have power, and then we'll get the better games. And that's what I want, just better games.
Jesper, you agree? You want better games, and you think that game developers are gods?
I mean, I think it's a useful way of thinking, and I think also that it just means that you can be a very imaginative god, right? So you can create all kinds of worlds, and so I think perhaps there's a tendency for our tools to want us to be one particular kind of god. So if I open kind of Unity or Unreal, they definitely want me to be the kind of god that creates a third-person game about a character walking through a world and pushing boxes, and that's not necessarily the most. You can make really interesting games that way, right? But I think if you take yourself seriously as a god, you also have to realize that there are, say, other games to be made, right? That you can go beyond genres, or you can think both about like the ethical implications of what you're doing, or make players think about ethical implications. So I think, yeah, think of it. We should think of ourselves as gods, but also like realize if we're gods, we should also be able to use our imagination.
Sebastian, same question for you.
Yeah, I'm a bit struggling with this implied power fantasy in this god issue, but I see the point about the responsibility. So of course, I think game developers should be artists and should be doing the best of what they can. But I also think because they have so much power and they have so much responsibility, it's maybe also nice if they consider themselves gods, if they were like some humble gods, maybe, because they know whatever they could possibly unleash. And I would maybe argue for such a position. And maybe it's also okay to be just a really cool game designer and a really cool creator without running into this power fantasy of being a god.
Okay, thanks to all of you. Thanks for joining us. This was really, really interesting. I think we could keep going for hours, but sadly the time is over now.
Thank you.
So thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Okay, I'm a game developer, and if I'm a god, I'm not sure why I'm still sitting here.
Because we had a theological seminar, and I don't know. I mean, there's something that Sebastian said was that maybe it's the other way around, like in the very beginning, you know, that maybe it's not that game developers are God, but that God is a game developer. I like the idea.
Okay, Tim, thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. We'll be back with another Let's Play. The last game of the Dev Booster content is Wreck Out, and we're going to play this with Indie Sträuche again after a short break.